Daniel Harper was known in the city as a man who built his empire from nothing. People often pointed at the tall glass tower downtown and said, "That is Harper's building." But very few knew how hard he had worked to reach that level. Daniel was not born into wealth. He grew up in a small apartment on the edge of town, where his father worked long hours as a mechanic and his mother took sewing jobs to support the family. From a young age, Daniel understood the value of money, discipline, and sacrifice. As a teenager, he delivered newspapers before school. In college, he worked night shifts at a warehouse while studying business during the day. He was always tired, but he never complained. He believed that success belonged only to those who refused to give up. Slowly, step by step, he started his own small trading company. At first, it was just him and a borrowed desk in a tiny office. Over the years, through smart decisions and strict habits, that small company grew into a powerful business empire. By the age of 45, Daniel Harper was a millionaire. He owned luxury cars, a large mansion in a private neighborhood, and shares in several successful companies. He wore expensive suits and carried himself with quiet confidence. In meetings, his words were sharp and clear. He trusted numbers, contracts, and written agreements. Everything in his world had rules. But success had changed him in ways he did not notice. Daniel believed that no one truly helped him when he was struggling. He often told himself that he had achieved everything alone. Because of this belief, he found it difficult to trust others. In business, this made him strong. He double-checked every deal. He read every line of every contract. He installed cameras in his offices to prevent theft. His employees respected him, but they also feared disappointing him. At home, however, his distrust slowly turned into quiet paranoia. Daniel lived alone in his large mansion. The house was beautiful but often silent. His marriage had ended years ago because, as his former wife once said, "You trust money more than people." Since then, he kept his personal life simple and controlled. He hired staff carefully and expected perfection from them. Among the staff was a maid named Maria. She had been working in his house for nearly 3 years. She was calm, polite, and hardworking. She arrived every morning at exactly 8 o'clock. She cleaned with care, cooked simple meals, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. Daniel appreciated her efficiency. She never asked for favors or advances on her salary. She seemed honest. Yet Daniel's mind was always alert. He watched small details. If a chair was slightly out of place, he noticed. If a spoon was missing from the kitchen drawer, he counted the rest. He kept a private notebook where he recorded household expenses. Not because he needed to save money, but because he needed control. Control made him feel safe. One evening, after returning from a long business trip, Daniel walked into his study and felt something strange. He could not explain it. Everything looked normal, but he sensed a tiny difference. He opened his drawer and counted the cash he kept for small payments. The amount seemed slightly lower than he remembered. It was not a large sum. For a man of his wealth, it was nothing. But for Daniel, it was not about the money. It was about the idea that something might be happening without his knowledge. He did not accuse Maria. He did not even mention it. Instead, he quietly checked the security footage from the cameras placed around the house. He watched hours of recordings late into the night. Maria appeared on the screen doing her usual work, cleaning, cooking, dusting. Nothing suspicious. Still, a small seed of doubt had been planted in his mind. Over the next few days, he began observing her more closely. He noticed that sometimes she seemed distracted. Once, he saw her checking her phone with a worried expression. Another time, she asked to leave 30 minutes early, saying she had something important to handle. She did not explain further, and Daniel did not ask. But in his heart, questions began to grow. Why was she distracted? Where did she go in such a hurry? Was there something she was hiding? Daniel tried to focus on his work, but the thoughts followed him even into business meetings. He reminded himself that trust must be earned every day. In his experience, people changed when money was involved. He had seen business partners betray him for profit. He had seen friends disappear when deals failed. These memories shaped his thinking. Late one night, standing alone by the large window of his mansion, Daniel looked out at the city lights. From the outside, he was powerful and successful. But inside, he felt a quiet tension. He realized that no matter how much wealth he gained, he could not escape the fear of being deceived. He told himself he was simply being careful. A successful man must always stay alert. But deep down, his caution was slowly turning into suspicion. And without knowing it, Daniel Harper, the powerful, disciplined, self-made millionaire, was about to let his fear guide his next decision. Something small changed in the house, and Daniel Harper felt it before he could explain it. For 3 years, everything had moved like clockwork. Maria arrived at 8 in the morning. She cleaned the living room first, then the kitchen, then the bedrooms upstairs. By noon, lunch was prepared. By 3, the house looked untouched by human life, like a showroom. Daniel liked routines. Routines meant control. Control meant safety. But lately, the rhythm felt different. It started with small things. One morning, Maria arrived 10 minutes late. She apologized softly and went straight to work. Daniel nodded, pretending not to care. 10 minutes meant nothing to his schedule. Yet he wrote it down in his small black notebook. 2 days later, he noticed she was distracted. While dusting the shelves in his study, she knocked over a picture frame. It did not break, but Maria looked unusually nervous, as if the world had fallen apart. Her hands trembled slightly when she picked it up. Daniel watched from the doorway without saying a word. That was not like her. Maria had always been steady, almost invisible in the way she moved. Now, there was worry in her eyes. Fear, maybe. Daniel told himself he was imagining it. But then came the phone calls. He rarely saw Maria use her phone during work hours. She was disciplined. Professional. Now, her phone buzzed almost every day. She would quickly step into the hallway or near the back door to answer it. She spoke in low whispers, turning her back as if protecting her words from being heard. One afternoon, Daniel stood at the top of the staircase when her phone rang again. He could not hear the full conversation, only broken pieces. Yes. I understand, please, just a little more time, she said softly. A little more time for what? His mind immediately began building stories. Debt. Trouble. Something illegal. He had seen it before, employees with secret problems who eventually turned desperate. That same evening, Daniel checked the cash drawer in his study again. The amount seemed slightly off. It was a small difference, almost unnoticeable. A man with his wealth would not miss it. But Daniel was not thinking like a millionaire. He was thinking like the poor boy who once counted every coin to survive. He sat at his desk and stared at the numbers. Was it possible he had miscounted before? Yes. Was it possible Maria had taken it? Also yes. The uncertainty bothered him more than the missing money. Over the next week, Maria asked to leave early twice. Each time she gave a simple reason. I have something important to take care of, she said politely. Daniel wanted details. What important thing? Where? With whom? But his pride stopped him. Instead, he simply nodded. That night, he reviewed the security footage again. He watched Maria clean, cook, water the plants. Nothing unusual. No stolen objects. No hidden bags. Yet the phone calls continued. The worried expressions remained. Then came the moment that truly disturbed him. On Friday morning, Daniel returned home unexpectedly after a cancelled meeting. He entered quietly through the front door. From the kitchen, he heard a soft sound. Crying. He froze. The sound was not loud, just quiet sniffles. He stepped closer and saw Maria standing near the sink, her back turned. She was holding her phone tightly in one hand, wiping tears quickly with the other. Within seconds, she composed herself. She washed her face, took a deep breath, and returned to cleaning as if nothing had happened. Daniel stepped away before she could see him. Now his thoughts were racing. Crying during work. Secret calls. Asking for time. Missing cash. His logical mind tried to remain calm. There could be many explanations. Family problems. Illness. Personal matters. But another voice inside him whispered something darker. What if she was pretending to be honest all these years? What if this was the moment she decided to take advantage of him? Daniel hated that thought, but he could not silence it. That night, he barely slept. He walked through the silent halls of his mansion, thinking about betrayal. He had built his entire life on being careful. Trust was earned slowly and lost quickly. He had protected his company by staying alert. Shouldn't he protect his home the same way? The next morning, he made a quiet decision. He would not accuse her without proof. He would not ask questions. He would watch. If Maria was hiding something, he would find out himself. As he stood by the window and saw her arrive at exactly 8 o'clock again, looking tired but composed, Daniel felt a strange mix of doubt and determination. The small signs had grown into heavy suspicion. And he was no longer willing to ignore them. Daniel Harper had made billion-dollar decisions without hesitation, but this choice felt strangely personal. He woke before sunrise, long before his alarm, staring at the ceiling of his dark bedroom. The house was silent, yet his thoughts were loud. For days, suspicion had been building inside him like pressure behind a locked door. The missed minutes. The whispered calls. The tears in the kitchen. The missing cash. He told himself he wasn't being paranoid. He was being careful. That morning, he decided he would follow Maria. The idea sounded dramatic, almost ridiculous for a man of his status. A millionaire secretly following his own maid? If anyone from his business circle found out, they would laugh. But Daniel did not care about appearances. He cared about certainty. At exactly 7:55 a.m., Maria walked through the front gate as usual. Daniel watched from the upstairs window, hidden behind a curtain. She looked normal. Simple clothes. Hair tied back. No sign of guilt. No sign of fear. Which somehow made him more suspicious. He pretended to leave for work at his usual time. His driver pulled the car out of the gate, turned the corner, and then stopped as instructed. Daniel stepped out. "I'll handle things myself today," he told the driver calmly. The driver looked confused but nodded and left. Daniel walked back quietly using the side entrance and waited inside his study. At 10:30 a.m., Maria finished cleaning the downstairs rooms earlier than usual. She removed her apron, checked her phone, and quickly grabbed her small handbag. Daniel's heartbeat increased. This was it. She informed the security guard at the gate that she needed to step out for an hour. The guard did not question her. Why would he? She had worked there for years. Daniel waited 30 seconds before stepping outside. He wore a simple jacket and sunglasses, trying to look less noticeable. For the first time in decades, he felt like someone else, not a powerful businessman, but a man chasing answers. Maria walked quickly down the street. She did not look back. She seemed focused, almost nervous. After a short distance, she stopped and got into a taxi. Daniel reacted fast. He raised his hand and flagged another taxi. "Follow that car," he said quietly. The driver glanced at him through the mirror with curiosity but did not ask questions. As they moved through traffic, Daniel's mind created endless possibilities. Maybe she had a secret family he didn't know about. Maybe she was selling information about him. Maybe she had been stealing small amounts of money over time. Or maybe, he was completely wrong. That last thought made him uncomfortable. The taxi turned into a busier part of the city, not a rich neighborhood, not a shopping district. The buildings became older. Simpler. The roads narrower. Finally, Maria's taxi stopped. Daniel leaned forward to see clearly. She stepped out and paid the driver. Then she stood still for a moment, as if gathering courage. After a deep breath, she walked toward a modest building with a faded sign above the entrance. It was a clinic. Daniel blinked. A clinic? This was not what he expected. He paid his driver and stepped out slowly, keeping distance. The building looked old but active. People sat outside on benches. Some looked tired. Some looked worried. A mother held a coughing child in her arms. An elderly man leaned on a walking stick. Maria walked inside without hesitation. Daniel stood frozen on the sidewalk. His mind struggled to adjust. Why would she come here? Was she sick? Was someone blackmailing her? Was she involved in something deeper? He told himself not to jump to conclusions. He needed facts. After a few moments, he entered the clinic. The smell of medicine and disinfectant filled the air. The waiting area was crowded. Nurses moved quickly between rooms. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful at the same time. Daniel kept his sunglasses on, pretending to check his phone while his eyes searched the room. Then he saw her. Maria was standing near the reception desk, speaking softly to a nurse. Her face looked serious. Not guilty. Not secretive. Just worried. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small envelope. Daniel watched carefully as she handed it to the nurse. Money. His chest tightened. So she was paying for something. But for whom? Maria was then directed toward a hallway leading to patient rooms. She walked slowly, as if preparing herself emotionally. Daniel followed at a safe distance, his polished shoes suddenly feeling too loud against the clinic floor. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. He had come expecting to confirm betrayal. Instead, he was walking into something he did not yet understand. As Maria stopped in front of one of the doors and gently pushed it open, Daniel found himself holding his breath. Whatever was behind that door was about to change everything he believed. And for the first time since this suspicion began, Daniel felt something unexpected rising inside him. Not anger. Not fear. But uncertainty. Daniel Harper had expected betrayal. He had imagined sneaky smiles, stolen money, or some hidden scheme to take advantage of him. But as he followed Maria into the modest clinic, his imagination collided with reality, and reality was far more confusing. The clinic was small, with white walls that had faded to a dull cream over time. A faint smell of antiseptic and medicine hung in the air. Patients sat in chairs, some whispering softly to companions, others fidgeting nervously. The chatter of nurses and the occasional beeping of machines created a rhythm Daniel wasn't used to. Everything here was different from his sleek office towers, the polished floors of his company headquarters, the quiet efficiency of his mansion staff. This place was raw. Real. Human. Maria moved with calm purpose, approaching the receptionist and speaking quietly. Daniel stayed behind, pretending to examine the pamphlets on the counter while his eyes tracked every movement. She handed over a small envelope. Daniel's mind raced. Money. Was she paying off someone? Was it bribery? His pulse quickened. He followed her down the narrow corridor. The walls were lined with framed certificates and faded photographs of past patients. The clinic seemed humble, almost struggling, unlike anything Daniel had imagined. Maria stopped outside a small room. Her hand hovered over the door handle as if she was summoning courage. Then she pushed it open and stepped inside. Daniel paused just outside. He could hear low whispers. Soft, careful, almost reverent. He leaned closer, trying to catch fragments of conversation. "Thank you so much for helping him," Maria said quietly. "Helping him? Who?" Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Inside the room, he could see a small boy lying on a cot. His face was pale, and his breathing was labored. A nurse was adjusting an oxygen mask while checking a chart. The boy was not related to Maria, or at least, not in any way Daniel had expected. She placed the envelope on the counter, then knelt beside the child. She whispered soothing words, her hand brushing his hair back from his forehead. She wasn't sneaky. She wasn't dishonest. She was caring. Protecting. Sacrificing. Daniel felt a strange lump in his throat. His mind tried to rationalize what he was seeing. Maybe she was related to the child. Maybe it was a distant cousin. But the way she spoke, the gentle touches, the careful attention, this wasn't obligation. This was love. Compassion. Commitment beyond duty. He watched as Maria quietly spoke to the nurse, arranging payments and ensuring the boy had the medicine he needed. Every coin she had earned, every penny she had saved or borrowed, she was spending here. For this child. Not herself. Not for luxury. Not for recognition. Daniel's world, built on contracts, control, and suspicion, suddenly felt hollow. All those nights of mistrust, all the hidden cameras, all the notes in his little black notebook, it had led him here, to a truth he never imagined. Maria, the maid he had doubted, was sacrificing quietly, selflessly, for someone she barely knew. His hand went to his mouth. The envelope she had handed over, the money, was nothing compared to the weight of what he was seeing. Years of suspicion, every paranoid thought he had entertained, now clashed violently with reality. He had been ready to confront her. To accuse her. To demand explanations. And here she was, not betraying him, but embodying everything he had forgotten about trust and humanity. Daniel took a careful step back, not wanting to be noticed. He needed a moment. He needed to breathe. His chest felt tight. The walls of the clinic seemed to close in, yet for the first time, they didn't feel suffocating, they felt real. He thought about his own life, the empire he had built, the wealth he had accumulated, the control he had demanded over every aspect of his world. And now he realized how little of that truly mattered. This small room, this sick child, and this devoted maid were teaching him lessons no business deal ever could. Maria finished adjusting the child's blanket and stepped to the side, watching him breathe peacefully. She whispered words of comfort that Daniel couldn't hear clearly but could feel. And as he stood there, hidden, he understood something profound. Trust was not something to be doubted. Compassion was not something to be measured. Sacrifice was the most powerful currency of all, and Maria had been paying it generously, every single day. Daniel's suspicion began to melt into something he had not felt in years, humility. And an unexpected, uncomfortable awareness that he might have judged someone entirely wrong, based on fear, ego, and habit rather than truth. For the first time in a long time, Daniel Harper didn't know what to do. He didn't want to rush forward, didn't want to interrupt the quiet magic unfolding in front of him. All he could do was watch, and slowly, very slowly, realize that the person he had doubted the most was teaching him the greatest lesson of his life. And that lesson was only beginning. Daniel Harper could hardly believe what he was seeing. His mind had built countless scenarios over the past week, each darker than the last, but none had prepared him for this. Maria wasn't hiding money. She wasn't running away with secrets. She wasn't betraying him in any way. She was quietly, diligently, almost heroically helping someone who had no one else. He stayed in the shadows, leaning against the wall, trying not to draw attention to himself. The small room smelled faintly of antiseptic, mixed with the unmistakable faint scent of a child who had been sick for too long. On the cot lay a boy, no older than 7, with a pale face and delicate features. His breathing was shallow, and his small hands clutched a worn blanket tightly. Daniel noticed the way Maria adjusted the blanket, brushing the boy's hair from his forehead, her fingers trembling slightly with care. "She's caring for him," Daniel whispered to himself, the words foreign in his own house of suspicion. The nurse glanced at Maria and smiled softly. "We'll start the treatment today. Are you ready?" she asked. Maria nodded, her eyes never leaving the child. Daniel's chest tightened. He had imagined confrontation, betrayal, anger, but what he was witnessing was the opposite: quiet sacrifice, courage, and pure devotion. He realized that every whispered phone call, every hurried step outside, every anxious look he had misinterpreted, had been about this child. Maria was paying for his treatment herself. Not a small amount. Not a token gesture. Every envelope she carried, every penny she saved, went to ensuring this boy had medicine, doctors, and care. And she had kept it secret. No one in Daniel's mansion knew. Not the other staff. Not anyone in her family. Only she knew. Daniel felt a knot of shame twist inside him. For weeks, he had doubted her, watched her, and planned to follow her. He had questioned her loyalty, her honesty, her integrity. And here she was, showing him a level of selflessness he had never imagined in anyone. His thoughts drifted back to his own life. Wealth, power, control, it had taken him decades to achieve, yet all of it felt hollow compared to the compassion he was witnessing. Here was a woman who had almost nothing, yet she was giving everything. Daniel realized that he had been blind to the simple truths: human kindness, courage, and sacrifice could not be measured in contracts, security cameras, or bank statements. Maria knelt beside the boy, speaking softly. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll get through this," she whispered. Her voice was gentle, steady, filled with love. She held his hand, her thumb stroking the back of it as if to transfer strength into him. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to step forward, to tell her he was sorry, to reveal that he had been following her, watching her, doubting her. But he couldn't. The moment was too delicate, too sacred. He realized some things could not be interrupted, could not be spoiled by words. Instead, he stayed hidden and watched. He watched Maria's hands, her expressions, the way she moved with purpose yet tenderness. She spoke to the nurse quietly, ensuring the boy would receive the best treatment available. Every movement, every decision, carried weight beyond what Daniel could have imagined. At that moment, he understood something vital. Trust, real trust, wasn't earned by appearances or obedience. It was earned by acts of love, by choices made quietly, without fanfare, without expectation. Maria had earned his trust not through words, but through action, and she had done it long before he had ever doubted her. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes, a rare and uncomfortable sensation for a man who had spent most of his life in control, behind a mask of power. He had prided himself on knowing people, on understanding motives, on never being blindsided. And yet, here he was, blindsided not by deceit, but by humanity. For a long moment, he simply watched. He watched Maria comfort the boy, ensure he had the medicine he needed, and face challenges with courage that seemed impossible for someone so quiet, so unnoticed in the world. Daniel knew then that nothing in his life, his wealth, his businesses, his achievements, could compare to what he was seeing. A single act of genuine care, a selfless sacrifice, could hold more power than a fortune. It could change lives. As Maria finally stood, exhausted but resolute, Daniel felt a wave of emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Guilt, awe, humility, he felt them all at once. He realized that he had been wrong about her, wrong about trust, wrong about the world in ways he couldn't have imagined. And he understood one more thing: whatever he did next, whatever actions he took, would need to honor what he had just witnessed. Because the truth of Maria's compassion had changed him forever. This was no longer a story of suspicion. It was a story of awakening, and Daniel Harper was at its very center, learning lessons money could never buy. Daniel Harper's mind was racing, yet strangely still at the same time. Every step he had taken to follow Maria, every suspicious thought, every hidden camera, every notebook entry now felt meaningless in the face of what he had just witnessed. For weeks, he had let paranoia guide his actions. He had imagined betrayal and deceit at every corner, yet here, in the quiet, fluorescent-lit clinic, he was confronted with a truth far beyond anything he had expected. The child on the cot, fragile and pale, was not Maria's own. That realization hit him like a punch. She wasn't receiving instructions from anyone in her family. She wasn't helping a relative. She was helping someone else's child. Someone who had no one. Someone who could not pay. Someone who depended entirely on her. Daniel watched her kneel beside the boy, brushing the sweat from his brow. Her voice was soft but firm. "You're safe now," she whispered, and he noticed the weight in her eyes. It wasn't exhaustion from work. It was the burden of responsibility, carried silently, without complaint. She had taken on this child's suffering as if it were her own. The nurse handed her a small chart, showing the next steps in treatment. Maria nodded, committing every instruction to memory. She consulted briefly with another volunteer who had helped set up the child's medications. The efficiency and care with which she operated stunned Daniel. She was organized, yet compassionate. Practical, yet deeply emotional. Every action revealed a depth of character he had never imagined. Daniel felt his chest tighten as a wave of guilt swept over him. For days, he had doubted her, watched her, scrutinized her, built scenarios of deception in his mind. He had allowed fear to cloud judgment, pride to blind him, suspicion to outweigh reason. And all of it had been unnecessary. All of it had been wrong. He remembered the small moments that had triggered his doubts, the brief pauses to check her phone, the moments of distraction, the times she had requested to leave early. Now he understood. Every call, every hurried departure, every anxious glance had been about this boy. She had been paying for his treatment, arranging appointments, and ensuring his comfort. She had been protecting someone she barely knew from suffering. Daniel could hardly breathe. The realization was almost too much. Here was someone he had dismissed, someone he had doubted, acting with more integrity and courage than most people he knew, including himself. It was a lesson in humility, one that he had never anticipated needing to learn. He remained hidden near the doorway, observing silently. He noticed the small details, the way she wiped the boy's hand with care, the way she adjusted the blanket so he wouldn't feel cold, the way she whispered encouragement that only he could hear. She was entirely devoted to his well-being, yet she had never sought recognition or thanks. Daniel thought about his own life, the empire he had built, the wealth he had accumulated, the control he had exerted over every aspect of his world. And he realized something profound: all of that power meant nothing in the face of genuine human compassion. Money could buy comfort, status, even influence, but it could not buy love, selflessness, or courage. Those were earned through choice, through action, through sacrifice. As Maria prepared the boy for a small procedure, she paused for a moment and adjusted her own posture, her face tight with concern. Daniel's eyes welled up. He had spent decades measuring people by usefulness, loyalty, and obedience, but she had measured herself by something entirely different, by the lives she could touch, the suffering she could alleviate, the hope she could provide. He understood then why she had kept this secret. Not because she wanted to deceive, but because she did not seek praise. She did not want pity. She did not want anyone to know. She was acting out of pure kindness, untainted by ego or expectation. For the first time in years, Daniel Harper felt powerless, not in a financial sense, not in a professional sense, but in a human sense. He had been so focused on control and suspicion that he had forgotten the simplest, most profound truths of life. Watching Maria care for this child, he realized that some acts of goodness could not be measured. They could not be predicted. They could not be controlled. And they could change people, not immediately, but deeply, profoundly, forever. Daniel stood quietly, letting the lesson sink in. He felt the weight of his previous mistrust lift slightly, replaced by awe and respect. In that small clinic room, surrounded by the quiet determination of a selfless woman and the fragile hope of a sick child, Daniel Harper learned what it truly meant to trust, to care, and to act with integrity. And he knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever look the same to him again. Daniel Harper could no longer stand in the shadows. Every instinct in his body screamed to remain hidden, to protect himself from what he thought he would find. But the longer he watched Maria, the more he realized that hiding wasn't an option. She wasn't sneaky, she wasn't dishonest, and she wasn't someone to fear. She was human in a way that Daniel had almost forgotten existed, a quiet hero, moving through life with purpose and selfless determination. His chest tightened as he watched her gently lift the child's hand and place a soft kiss on his forehead. He wanted to step forward, to speak, to apologize for every suspicion he had allowed to grow into doubt, every secret judgment he had made, every camera he had installed, every note he had written. But even as the words formed in his mind, he hesitated. Could he interrupt this sacred moment? Could he risk shattering the trust, the tenderness, the care that filled the room like sunlight through a window? Maria finally stepped back, her hands trembling slightly. She adjusted the blanket one last time, smoothing it over the boy with careful precision. Her eyes, which moments before had been fixed entirely on the child, lifted slightly, scanning the room, and Daniel froze. She looked so human, so real, so devoted, yet so unassuming. He realized she had carried a weight that he could never have imagined, and she had done it without complaint, without notice, without expectation of reward. Daniel's mind raced. All of his doubts, all of his fears, all of his paranoia, they now seemed petty, absurd even. The irony was almost unbearable. Here he was, a man who had built an empire through vigilance, suspicion, and control, and he had been blind to the courage and integrity of someone so close to him. The very person he had doubted the most had shown him a kind of bravery that money could not buy, a kind of selflessness that no contract could guarantee. He took a step forward, then stopped. He wasn't sure what to say, or if anything could truly express the weight of his realization. How could he possibly apologize for the weeks of suspicion, the silent monitoring, the assumptions of betrayal? How could he explain that his heart, hardened by years of business deals and a constant need to protect himself, had been touched in a way he never expected? Tears formed unbidden in his eyes. He quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by his own vulnerability. But they wouldn't leave. They were not just tears of guilt, they were tears of awakening. The world he had built, with all its rules and safeguards, suddenly seemed shallow compared to the depth of what he was witnessing. Maria's small acts of kindness, her courage in the face of hardship, her unwavering commitment to another human being, it was more powerful than any boardroom victory, any financial success, any title or status he had ever achieved. Daniel realized something even more profound: he had underestimated the human capacity for love and sacrifice. He had believed that loyalty could be measured, that trust could be earned through obedience, that people's motives could always be calculated. And yet here, in this small, crowded clinic, a woman who had almost nothing had demonstrated more loyalty, more integrity, and more courage than he had ever seen in his life. Finally, unable to remain a silent observer any longer, Daniel stepped into the room. The subtle click of his shoes on the tile made Maria look up, startled. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened as she recognized him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Words felt insufficient, inadequate even, in the face of what had just unfolded. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice breaking slightly as he spoke. "Maria. I'm sorry. I doubted you. I thought you were hiding something from me. I was wrong. Completely wrong." Maria blinked, then smiled faintly, not with triumph, but with understanding. "Sir, it's okay. I know it looked strange. I didn't mean for you to worry. Her voice was steady, calm, but there was a softness in her eyes that pierced him deeper than any accusation ever could. Daniel felt his shoulders slump, the tension he had carried for weeks finally releasing. He realized that this moment, this confrontation, this apology, this human connection, was more valuable than anything else he had accumulated in his life. He had followed suspicion to this room, expecting betrayal, and instead, he had found truth, compassion, and the courage of a person willing to give everything for someone else. For the first time in a long time, Daniel Harper felt vulnerable, and he allowed himself to stay that way. The walls he had built around his heart, the defenses he had relied on for decades, began to crumble. And in that quiet clinic, amidst the soft hum of machines and the faint scent of medicine, he understood a lesson that no amount of money or power could ever teach: true courage and integrity are often found in the most unexpected places, and they can change a life, including his own, forever. He stepped closer to Maria, quietly, not to intrude, but to show respect. And as he watched her once more adjust the child's blanket, he knew that nothing in his past experiences, in his wealth, in his empire, could compare to the strength he had witnessed. In that room, Daniel Harper finally understood what it truly meant to trust, and to be human. Daniel Harper stepped back from the small hospital room, his mind and heart racing in a way he hadn't felt in decades. The world outside the clinic felt distant, irrelevant, as if the city, his businesses, his wealth, and his rigid routines were part of a life he no longer fully belonged to. Everything he had believed about people, trust, and success had been challenged in the last few hours, and he knew that things could never go back to the way they were. For weeks, he had followed suspicion, imagining the worst about Maria, the maid he had trusted but secretly doubted. He had prepared himself for confrontation, for explanations, for potential betrayal. Instead, he had discovered a truth that struck him harder than any business failure or financial setback ever could. Maria had been quietly dedicating herself to the care of a sick child who was not even her own. She had been using her modest earnings, every saved coin, and even borrowed money, to provide the child with medicine, treatment, and comfort. As Daniel walked toward the entrance of the clinic, he realized that this moment required action. It was not enough to simply apologize to Maria or to silently admire her courage. He needed to do something tangible, something that could ensure the child's life was secured, that the effort and sacrifice Maria had undertaken were supported fully and without burden. He approached Maria after she stepped out of the room, exhausted but composed. Her uniform was slightly rumpled, her hands still faintly trembling from care, but her eyes shone with a quiet resilience. Daniel took a deep breath, his chest tight with emotion, and spoke, "Maria, I can't believe how wrong I was. I followed you expecting deception, but I found something far greater: selflessness, courage, and care beyond measure. You've done something incredible, and I want to help." Maria blinked, momentarily startled. She looked unsure, almost shy, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes as she waited for him to continue. Daniel explained that he wanted to cover the full cost of the child's treatment, to make sure that every appointment, every medicine, every necessary procedure was taken care of. He insisted that the contribution remain anonymous if she wished, so that the focus would remain entirely on the child and not on recognition or publicity. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, Daniel saw the weight of exhaustion and worry lift slightly from her shoulders. She tried to refuse politely, saying she could manage, but Daniel was firm. He explained that he wanted to correct the imbalance caused by his suspicion, that he wanted to ensure that her sacrifices were supported, and that he wanted to contribute to a cause more important than business, contracts, or control. As they walked out of the clinic together, Daniel could feel a change within himself. He thought about the life he had built, about the walls of suspicion and control that had insulated him from genuine human connection. For the first time in years, those walls were dissolving. He understood that wealth alone could not measure the value of a person, and power alone could not define greatness. True greatness, he realized, was found in the quiet courage of someone willing to give of themselves for another. Over the following days, Daniel arranged for the child's full medical care, ensuring that every expense, every consultation, every piece of treatment would be provided without interruption. He watched quietly as Maria continued her care, relieved that the burden she had carried alone was now shared, not diminished, but strengthened by support. The experience left an indelible mark on Daniel. He began to rethink how he interacted with people, how he measured trust, and how he viewed loyalty and integrity. He realized that suspicion could only take one so far, that true understanding required observation, empathy, and openness. He also understood that humility could be more transformative than wealth, and compassion more enduring than control. Most importantly, he recognized that his actions could now make a real difference. For the first time, Daniel saw the profound impact one person could have when guided not by fear, but by generosity and humanity. He had started as a man driven by suspicion, ready to confront and accuse, and ended as a man awakened, humbled, and inspired. As he returned to his mansion that evening, Daniel looked around at the familiar surroundings, the polished floors, the luxury, the order he had meticulously maintained, and realized how small those things now felt. They were comforts, yes, but they were not the measure of life's true meaning. That measure, he now understood, lay in empathy, in courage, in acts of selfless love, and in the ability to see and support goodness in others. And as he reflected on everything he had witnessed, Daniel Harper finally allowed himself to feel a profound sense of gratitude, not for wealth, or control, or status, but for the lesson Maria had quietly taught him, that life's true value is measured not in what we hold, but in what we give, and not in suspicion, but in trust, understanding, and compassion. From that day forward, Daniel did not just live as a millionaire, he lived as a man transformed, guided by the quiet power of empathy, forever changed by the courage and heart of a maid who had shown him the true meaning of humanity.